Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. This past week in the Overwatch League was pretty crazy and eventful, so let's jump into it and talk about what happened. So let's throw up my picks from this past weekend on the screen right now. And as you can see, some surprises took place this week, but still a decent week for me. 1-1 in the big pick department and 9-4 overall, so not too bad. Let's start with Saturday, where we had a bunch of doozy matches in the APAC region. The Charge with a 3-2 victory over the Seoul Dynasty, stopping a reverse sweep. It was a good series. Charge looked pretty good. Dynasty looked better. They weren't playing those weird compositions they were running against New York last week, so it was a good series. I thought that it was closer than I expected it to be. I thought it could be that close, but I didn't think it would be that close because I thought Seoul was somewhat disappointing recently. But it's a good series. It's an interesting series. I think that the Charge are cementing themselves as a top team in Asia, something that I wasn't. I thought they were a top team, but I think they are proving they're better than even I was giving them credit for. I am not afraid to admit it. Dynasty, I still think, are strong. They're just not quite where I think that they could be, but I don't think that this is a bad region at all. I actually think all of these teams that we saw play in this kind of round group between the Dynasty, Charge, Spark, and Excelsior, I think all four of those teams are looking really good in general. The Dynasty are just still too inconsistent. They came close, but couldn't pull it off in the end. My big pick for Saturday was the Spitfire against the Hunters. I thought this match would be much closer than it was. It was not. The Spitfire looked much better. They are looking much stronger than even I expected them to. I like the Spitfire. I think if they were in North America, they'd be a pretty good team. I think they'd be around the likes of, say, the Gladiators, the Rain, maybe even the Eternal. I think that's kind of the level the Spitfire are at, potentially. But who knows? We would have to wait and see what actually happens if the Spitfire played some of those teams. Hunters, we'll talk about them a little more later when I get to a match against the Dragons. But the Hunters they're the Hunters. I haven't learned anything about them recently, and that's going to stay a thing, unfortunately. The final Asia match on Saturday was a doozy. In my opinion, it was the best match of the weekend. The Hangzhou Spark taking on the New York Excelsior. The Spark with Architect and QOQ in the lineup for the first time, as well as Mika in the lineup for the first time, but Mika has been on the team already. And the Spark looked really good. This is a 3-2 match in 6 maps. Very, very close. Very good series. The NYXL made some mistakes towards the end. They ran some weird compositions I wasn't really a fan of. They keep running this Winston Wrecking Ball comp with Mono on the ball and Hotba on the Hog, or on the Winston. And it might be the worst composition I've ever seen New York run. It is horrific. It is so bad. I don't want to see Mono on the Wrecking Ball anymore, and I don't want to see Hotba on the Winston anymore because it just looks atrocious. And it's the worst composition I've ever seen come out of New York. And if they never run that composition again, I'll be so happy because I think it's awful. Luckily for New York, Diva comes back next week. So they'll be able to play Diva, which I think is where they look better. This was not a great composition for them. I wish they would have just stuck more to Double Shield. I think they look better in Double Shield, but they didn't. And the Spark played very well with their new additions and their new pieces. And I think the Spark are really looking like a contender to potentially be the second best team in the Asia region. I think the title for the second best team is actually pretty wide open. And then the Spark really showed that they have a chance to be the second best team. Moving on to North America for Saturday. The San Francisco Shock with a 3-0 victory over the Eternal. The San Francisco Shock become the first team ever to beat every team in the Overwatch League in a sweep. So, how's that for the Shock? The Eternal with XZ back, which I didn't know was going to happen until the day of the game. And, of course, with Sparkle in the lineup. I wasn't crazy about the Eternal. I'm actually the more I see of the Eternal, the more I think that they are actually not all that great. I think they're a pretty middle of the pack team. I think they went from being a team kind of punching up to the top to being a team serving as, I guess, kind of gatekeepers. They're, I think, actually on the level of the Reign and potentially the Gladiators. I think the Reign or the Eternal just aren't looking that good. And when they look good, I still think they struggle a bit, and I think that is really where I don't even know what's wrong with them. I just think that they have had some weird compositions. I don't love their tank line. Sparkle, I think, does not have the flexibility. He's really talented, but he doesn't have the flexibility to play some of the heroes they need, which is where I think the biggest problem comes in. But the Shock looked good, and I'll talk more about them a little bit later. Next, the Atlanta Reign with a pretty dominant victory over the Defiant. I think it was a 3-1 or a 3-0. I don't remember exactly what it was. But it was a pretty one-sided affair for the Atlanta Reign. Saw some Erster, some Edison, some Baby Bay, of course. I think the Reign are looking like a middle-of-the-pack team. They're losing the teams that are close to them or better than them. And they're beating teams who they are better than. And they're doing it pretty handily every time. I don't really know what to make of the Atlanta Reign. I think they are a weird team who, in theory, should get better. But I don't know if that will actually happen. We will wait and see. Defiant, I think that they are a team that are still on the rise. But I think that their struggles this late in the season are kind of proof that they're not really going to make a nice late season run. They have looked okay, but they have been struggling recently. Even with their win over Vancouver last week, which was a very good win for them. It was a pretty dominant win. I think the Defiant are proving that they can compete with some of these other kind of mid to lower level teams, like your Gladiators, your Fuel, potentially your Outlaws, and they definitely look better than the Justice and the Uprising. This is a really interesting team, but they're just not quite putting everything together. Next, the LA Gladiators took on the Houston Outlaws. Houston Outlaws taking the victory in a 3-1 fashion. Pretty dominant for the Outlaws. Dante put on a clinic on the Tracer. Dante, one of the best Tracer performances I have ever seen. He was incredible, but what else would you expect from Dante at this point? Interesting stuff coming out of the Gladiators. LH Cloudy looked okay. I think that one of the problems that is pretty obvious with the Gladiators is tank play. Inconsistencies from OG, I think, are really holding this team back. I think OG's a great player, but he's not super consistent. He has very high peaks, but he needs some work before I think he is really, really, really going to excel as a player. Kevster played very well for the Gladiators. I don't want people to think that, because he wasn't pulling a Dante-level performance, he didn't play very well. He had a very good game, but when you have Dante on the other side just completely obliterating the other team, you're not going to look as good. Outlaws, I think, are a team who are showing that they're very close. They have a couple pieces that if they just figure out and if they just improve, they work on their team coordination a little bit, I think they're a team who could potentially do something late in the season. I don't know what the playoffs are going to look like, but I wouldn't say the Outlaws are a team who are bad right now. I'd put them as a mid-table team. I think they're better than the Fuel. They're definitely better than the Defiant. They're arguably better than the Gladiators. Yeah, they struggled against the Reign the last time they played them, but that's a matchup I think would be interesting to see now, because I think those are teams that are closer together now than they've ever been. Final match on Saturday. The Vancouver Titans, the new Vancouver Titans roster, gets their first win in the Overwatch League with a 3-0 victory over the Dallas Fuel. No Kevster in the lineup for the Fuel. Only Oni God playing. So, interesting decision from them. I've heard mixed things, such as we were trying to get Oni God worked into the lineup. I've heard things such as Decay wanted a break. I don't know what the reason was for Decay not playing the whole series. If it wasn't that Decay wanted a break, And if it was simply that they just wanted to work Oni got in, there's no excuse for why he didn't come in when things weren't going as well. You know the type of player that Decay is. Unless he specifically said, I don't want to play this game, he should have been playing. If you made the decision as a coaching staff to say you're not going to play at all no matter what happens, I think that's a bad decision. The Titans looked good. Shockwave is a really good player who I think has really, really rejuvenated this Titans roster, and I think has really had a huge impact. But I feel like the Fuel had some really poor coaching decisions, and I think that really cost them the series. Like I said, I don't want to take anything away from the Titans. I thought the Titans looked good. That was the best they've ever looked. And I think that this is proof that they are a team that is ready to kind of make moves and make jumps to potentially compete next season and even down the stretch this season. They still have a lot of games left. They've only played 10 matches. They have not even played half of their season yet. So they have time to build up matches and improve. They're very far from being out, and I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch down the stretch. And I'm curious to see what happens with them. But good win for them, and rough loss for the Fuel. Moving on to Sunday, we had another banger of a match in the Asia region, the Guangzhou Charge and the Hangzhou Spark. Guangzhou Charge win with a reverse sweep, 3-2. I think the Spark are only going to get better from here. I thought that there were definitely some moments where there was a little bit of shakiness, but I thought QOQ has looked very good so far. And Architect and Godsby together have been absolutely dominant. This is a team to watch out for, the Spark. They're winning against New York, and their loss against Guangzhou. While they lost to Guangzhou, it was a really, really, really good series from them. They're 7-8, so they also have a number of matches left to go where they can kind of build up some momentum, some steam. And when the end of the season comes around, we may be seeing the Spark as a potential team that can make a deep run. The Charge are interesting as well. I don't really know what's going on with their support line. I think Neptuno is back in Korea because I think I saw him with the team. But I think they've looked pretty good. We didn't see Nero. I think that was just because they were running Widow Tracer, and he doesn't really play the Widow or the Tracer at the highest level. I think Eileen is their better Tracer, so they were running Eileen for the most part. This is a very good series, and two teams that I think are both in a really good spot, and I'm excited to see what happens with these two teams going forward, because I would love to see them play again, because I thought this match was really, really good. Next, we had the Chengdu Hunters and the Shanghai Dragons. The Chengdu Hunters got reverse swept by the Shanghai Dragons. Yes, the Hunters were up 2-0, and the Dragons came back with the reverse sweep. You saw Gega replay for the first map. She was subbed out immediately after that. Dragons, they were kind of toying with the Hunters for a little while, but I thought the series was pretty good. The Hunters are a team who, like I said, they can have really great performances. They can have really bad performances. They do whatever they want. They're the same team as they were last season. They're just not as lucky this season. But the way they play is the same. They play a little more on meta stuff this season than they did last season, but it's a weird thing to see. But the Dragons, with their main lineup, still look really, really good. I don't think anything's really going to stop that. I just think that the Shanghai Dragons are a force to be reckoned with still in Asia and in the rest of the league. Final Asia match on Sunday was the NYXL taking on the London Spitfire. NYXL walk away with the 3-1 victory. It was pretty close at some times. I thought Glister had a great series. I thought Babel had a great series. I thought Bernard had a great series all for the Spitfire. But ultimately, the NYXL were able to win the series in 4 maps. I think New York still has some stuff to work on. I know there's been talk about how the fact that they're really just trying to figure out how to adjust to playing a more aggressive playstyle so that they can kind of switch between an aggressive and a passive playstyle depending on what the situation calls for. There's obviously still some growing pains with that, but I think it's something that hopefully over time they can figure out. The Spitfire, as I said before, I think they're a team who really could compete with some mid-level teams in North America. I think they have some really great players. We haven't seen a lot of Sanguinar recently, which is interesting because I think he's been pretty good. He's been a player I've been pretty impressed with. on this Spitfire roster, but really Bernard, Babel, and Glister were the really impressive players in their series against New York. But it was a pretty good series. I think New York is probably a little bit lower than maybe where their potential is right now. I think that there's some obvious growing pains that have been holding them back a bit, but for the most part, I think when New York play something that they're good at, they look very, very, very good and almost unbeatable. When they play something somewhat uncomfortable to them, they usually look decent, but they don't look the same dominant team that they do when they play something they're good at. Anyway, that's it for the Asia matches. Now we have the North America matches from Sunday. The Fusion, they decimated the Uprising. Wasn't even close. There were some times where maybe Boston had a chance to do something, but nah, the Fusion just kind of ripped everything away from them, and that's what I expected to happen. I thought the Uprising's performances against Paris and the Gladiators were kind of not flukes, but we had been under the impression that Boston was so bad and that the Gladiators and the Eternal were so much better that Boston had to be a team that was secretly like really good, when in reality I think the truth is the Gladiators and the Eternal aren't actually that good. And the Uprising are just getting to a point where they're bottom middle of the table team. And I think that's what we saw. The Fusion still look very good. I cannot wait until the match next weekend between the Fusion and the Shock. That one is going to be a banger, and I cannot wait for it. That is the match that I am waiting for the most for next week. My big pick for Sunday, I got wrong. I picked the Mayhem to beat the Valiant, but the Valiant DPS duo, KSP, Shax, were too much for the Mayhem to handle. I've still noticed some of the same issues I had with the Mayhem during the May Melee. I've still noticed poor synchronization between the Halt Accretion combo, and I've seen some problems with certain play in end of match scenarios, or just kind of lots of C9s, poor communication potentially. Things that I think are the biggest problems in the Mayhem are that they're a team who gets a lot of C9s they C9 a lot, I should say. That's something that worries me about this Mayhem team. I don't really know what the cause of that is. I don't know if it's just a lack of communication, if it's passivity that they just are unable to shake in some of those big moments. Maybe they get just kind of stage fright, I guess, in those moments where things are starting to count down and they're running out of time. They definitely could touch points at times, and they don't, but it's a little bit worrisome to see a team as good as the Mayhem struggle with some pretty basic low-level problems like that. I don't think it's going to completely derail this team, but I think that's something they need to clean up if they really, really, really want to be a team who can consistently beat some of these teams that are very, very good. They're very good. They're getting to a point where they're one of the best teams in the league, but they just have to clean up a few things before I'm ready to say that they are definitely on the elite, better than the rest level. Final match was the Justice against the Shock. This one wasn't even close. This one wasn't even fun to watch. I think it was like a 35-minute match. I mean, not actually, but it felt like it. Justice were never in the series. Even when they were in it on Control, it was because the Shock were running really wacky compositions with heroes on. Like, Super was playing Ball and Sigma. Like, that's obviously not going to be something that the Shock do seriously in the future. So it's pretty obvious that the Shock were going to win this series from the beginning. The Justice have had some bright spots, some good moments. They need help on the DPS line. Tuba and Stitch are not going to be able to cut it as your long-term solutions. Stitch has not been a top-tier hit-scan player for a long time. It's something that you need to be able to improve upon. You need more answers in that position, and I don't think that this team has it right now. So that's what happened this past weekend. Let's take a quick look at the league standings. Things are starting to change a little bit. Things are starting to shake up. You can see the Valiant moving up a little bit. The Outlaws moving up a little bit. Fuel dropping a little bit. Titans moving up a little bit. There's some movement really in kind of the bottom half of the standings. Top half looking mostly the same, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I guess. Top teams are keeping their spots for the most part. The Valiant, I would expect to move ahead of the Eternal. These two play next weekend, and I would expect the Valiant to come out on top of that one. I think they're the better team right now, and I would be surprised if the Eternal were able to find the win, because they don't look the best right now. But that is everything I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. Let me know your thoughts about this past weekend in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you have to say, but I am going to get out of here. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.